good afternoon, everyone. It's fabulous to have you here. October, starting to work our way. I don't know. Sometimes it's quickly, and sometimes it's slowly, isn't it? Towards the end of another year, it's really flying by, isn't it? This time for me, I don't know. For me, it's certainly hurtling by. And I think that that's why topics like this notion of how we can stop and think creatively, are incredibly important. In the little strap line here that I've got for the title of the webinar today, it's about how to foster innovation in a compliance-focused world. Now, I think that the two words in that little strap line there that tend to pique the most interest and attention within people are innovation and compliance. I think we actually have almost an emotional reaction to those two words. I think that when we talk about innovation, oh boy, for most leaders these days, when you go to a conference about innovation and you come back from the conference and at the next team, group, staff meeting that you hold, you say, I went to an innovation conference and I'd like to tell you about the things I'm going to change here as a result of that conference, the most likely response that you'll get from your team members is rolled eyes. And it's sad because the word innovation, I believe, has come to mean for most people more work. And that's actually not what the root of really great innovation is. In fact, it's at the very root of what horrible innovation is, when you provide people with more complexity and when you provide them with more task to undertake. That's not what innovation's about. Innovation, at what most of you will have heard of at a disruptive level, is about making things simpler. And it's about taking the complicated and making it move seamlessly. And when you can do that for people, they start to see innovation again as a favour. But I've started to even think that we need to address that word innovation. We either need to reframe it with our people and say that actually I'm not talking about additional work here, I'm talking about things being done differently and more simply. And either that or we need to change the word. And in fact, if I was to write this strapline for you in a way that would be more familiar, in that if I knew all of the people who'd registered today, we talked about this concept many, many times, I wouldn't even use the word innovation. I use the word invention. I think that inventions, whenever I mention inventions, people sort of get to this light bulb idea that you can also see that's so inspired my banner for today. This Thomas Edison kind of idea that things are just so much better on the other side of invention. Once you've got an invention, oh man, can you imagine it? Can you imagine us living without it? And if you think about the inventions that have had significant impact in our lives, in the way that we work, there's a reason that we, for instance, say that the best thing since sliced bread. Can you imagine before we could slice bread? That'd be terrible. But it's things like mobile phones, it's things like running water, it's things like electricity, it's things like the invention of currency. They're all inventions, not so much innovations. They didn't take something and make it better. They said, no, there's got to be a different way to do this. And on the other side of that invention, really fantastic things happen. So I kind of like to speak to the notion of invention because I think it promotes in people almost this mad scientist kind of idea that when we're talking about invention rather than innovation, that's where creativity happens. That's where almost the crazy stuff happens, because creative thinking is about getting to the very edges of our thinking. It's about exploring what's right out there in at the fringes of our possibilities. It's a little dangerous, it's a little risky. And I often refer to it as it's mowing the lawn at the edge of the cliff, but someone's got to do it. And the other word there, like I said, that invokes some sort of emotional responses, people, is this compliance. And for most of us, the emotional reaction we have to that, it can be a little bit whatever, compliance, but we do a lot of it. And there's a reason that we do a lot of it. And it's because it's safe. It's incredibly safe to comply. It's incredibly safe socially to do what other people are doing. I'm an intense people watcher. And whenever I do watch people, I see the way that context manipulates to an incredible degree the way that people behave. It's quite extraordinary to watch. My wife Anthea says that if you watch me and my friends and I, if I should using my proper English, if you watch my friends and I at a barbecue, we have a friend who has a really distinct voice. He sort of talks a bit like this and says, "G'day Adam, would you like a beer?" And if we go around for a barbecue, given a couple of hours, most of the males there are talking that way. We comply. it helps us to be able to fit in. Of course, when you're in business, fitting in can be the death of you. You certainly don't attract new customers by fitting in. You certainly don't retain important customers by fitting in and appearing to be exactly the same as everybody else. We need to stand out. And I really love that notion of being able to be outstanding. I was provoked once when in my school principal days. I was provoked by a professor at a university who asked us how many of us in our schools had the value of excellence espoused, as we are an excellent school. Most schools will have somewhere between 3 and 10 values. They say this is what we stand for. Half of the room of principals put their hand up, and he looked at us and he said, "So what did excellent just become?" And we went, "Oh, yeah." And while we were providing our answers to him, and we were saying things like average and mediocre, run-of-the-mill, he said, "No, you still haven't got it, have you?" And we said, "What do you mean?" And he said to us, "The opposite of excellence." He asked us, "What's the opposite of excellence?" We were saying mediocre and average. And he said, no. If everybody's excellent, that's already mediocre and average. The opposite of excellence is outstanding. It's how you actually get your organisation to stand out. And that's a little light bulb moment for me that has stayed with me for an incredibly long time. So what's this webinar about today? It's about how you can get your mad scientist activated within your organisation, within your business, such that the grass at the edge of the cliff gets mowed and your people stop complying and start doing things that are different and that stand out and that make your organisation stand out. And I reckon that's a worthy ambition. So before we get going, can I just encourage you to get involved today? You'll see that there's a GoToWebinar control panel in front of you today, and you don't have to be passive about this one. I can see you all. I can't figuratively see you all, don't worry. There's not some weird bug on your computer that's activating your webcam. I can see names of the people that have registered and that have come along today. So I want to encourage you to actually be a part of the webinar today. Sometimes when we're discussing something that's just a little bit abstract like creativity, there's no straight lines between being not creative and being creative. It's a weird, winding, confusing journey from time to time, and sometimes that requires a little sense making. So feel free to interact. There's a few ways you can do that. Number one is you can put your hand up. So if you decided to just hit that little palm that looks like, just a hand placed up, old school classroom, you'll make me feel incredibly comfortable with given my teaching background. Then I can unmute you from where I am, and we can and we can ensure that we can have a quick chat. I think whatever you've got to talk about will be of benefit to everybody else who's in the webinar. The other thing you can do is you can ask a question. So you'll hear me, I'm sure, incredibly seamlessly from time to time. You'll notice me just pause, and it's usually because I'm just having a quick look at the question box just to see if there are any questions that are bobbed up where some of that sense making needs to happen. So what I would like to do today is, first of all, preface the webinar by having a bit of a chat about what it is that we mean by creativity. And then what I would like to do is to show for you what we're targeting. So what do creative people do? And then what do people who lead creative people, what are the hallmarks of their leadership? And to be really honest, I want to keep it really simple. As I mentioned, it can be really hard when you want to set about creating a creative team, that it can be really hard to know where to start. And so what I would like to do today is to not be convoluted, to not innovate, but to invent, and to just give you a starting point in the way that you can think about it. So what do we mean by creativity? I want to make perhaps a controversial contention here, and that is that there's been some wonderful work that has been bastardized, if you will, and made and turned into something that has confused us about creativity. So the work of the wonderful Carol Dweck, who brought us the growth mindset idea that businesses, that sporting organisations, that educational institutions all around the world have bought into, has been that we need to have growth rather than fixed fixed mindsets, that there's always something else we can do. We can always get better at things, that nothing is set in stone, that we can always improve, we can always get better, we could always be different. And part of the research that Dweck refers to in her work is the difference between the left brain and the right brain. And there's a simplification, and if you will, an oversimplification that has become dangerous around Dweck's work. And that is that the idea is that if you use the left brain, then you're into facts and plans. And if you use the right side of your brain, then you're into creativity and design. And I think even graphics or animations or pictures like you can see on the screen right now emphasize that apparently one's better than the other. That clearly all the colourful, cool stuff is on the right side here. So you're supposed to be a right brainer because that's the creative part of your brain. And you wouldn't want to be a left brainer because that means that you're going to spend your life poring over flowcharts and spreadsheets. And it's not true. It's absolutely untrue. We have brainist attitudes out there as a result of this oversimplification of Dweck's work, and even Dweck has had to come out and address this. There are too many people running around the country saying that they're either a left brainer or a right brainer. Horribly untrue. Your penchant, if you will, forgive my awful Frankstonese French there, for one side of the brain over the other is actually incredibly small. Your tendency for one side of the brain compared to the other is actually quite slight. So truly creative people spend a lot of time flicking backwards and forwards, getting what they need from one side of the brain to the other. I had a behavioural psychologist recently I was speaking to, and she says that the connective tissue that exists between those two hemispheres of the brain, she said it's often useful to view it like a river. And really effective people know that there is really good stuff on both sides of the river, and they just spend their time going to whichever side of the river they needed to at this point. Genuinely creative people don't just go to the right brain because it's their favourite place to go. They go to the right brain because they know that the task that's required of them requires right brain thinking. Those same creative people also go to the left brain if they know that it's a wonderful fit between the task that's been provided of them to visit the things that are stored for them and available to them on the left side of the brain. This psychologist, she refers creative people as just having a really good boat that goes from one side of to the other really quickly and adeptly, and it has plenty of room to be able to take stuff from one side to the other as well, which I think is a useful metaphor for what we mean by creative people. What we mean by creative people is they use all their brain. And I think that that's kind of a very simple metaphor that most of us can say, actually, it would be nice if the team members that I lead in my school, in my organisation, in my business, use all of their brain. And so that's what we're targeting today. So what is it that creative people tend to do? So what they tend to do, first of all, is they reject patterns. So they see the way that things have always been done. There's a fabulous meme that I saw recently of a sign up on the wall of an organisation. And I think the really artful part about this meme that I saw, and there's some truly unartful memes out there. But the really artful part about this one is that I've got absolutely no idea where it worked, where it was. So who knows what sort of institution this was up on the wall in, but the writing on the wall was the most dangerous phrase in the human language is, this is the way we've always done it. So people who are genuinely creative question that constantly. What you can see on the screen here is called an ostrich pillow. I think that it's an incredibly clever device. There's been an innovation placed upon the ostrich pillow, an even further extension of this pillow to be used for planes that some of you may have seen in some advertisements recently. I don't know about you, but I find resting and sleeping on planes incredibly difficult. It's possibly due to the fact that I'm 6'4" and 120 kilograms. I have to be wedged into a plane and I have to be crowbarred out. So sleeping on a plane is a real challenge for me. Indeed, just leaning back is very is uncomfortable for me. The seats just aren't all that supportive. I feel conscious of flicking that button and having my seat recline so that somebody's chicken cacciatore flies onto their lap behind me. So I find sleeping very difficult. But I have found that one of the things that I can do is to put the tray down and to sort of put my elbows on the tray and put my hands on my head and to sit in that position. I take a pillow with me on the tray, and it should be useful, but unfortunately when you've got your elbows on the tray and your hands on your forehead, I can get reasonably comfortable there, but the pillow's of no use to me. I can't use it in this situation. So the incarnation of the ostrich pillow that I really like is that there's one that's been set up so that you can actually put it on your tray, put your arms to it, put your head on a pillow, and you find yourself in an incredibly comfortable position. I can sleep in that position on a plane if I'm provided with a tool that allows me to do it. Yet the pattern of the way we've used pillows, the pattern of the way we've designed pillows over the years is that they must be rectangular, they must have a slip on them, and you must put it behind your head. So there's patterns around the production and there's patterns around the use, and genuinely creative people reject those. They say that you do not need to design and you do not need to use products exactly the way that we always have done. In fact, what you can do is take something that has already been used a certain way and change the way that it's used, change the way that it's accessed, make it, as I mentioned before, make it easier and simpler for people to be able to access that, make it easier and simpler for somebody to fall asleep at a desk or to fall asleep at on a plane if that's what they're looking to do. There are examples of this all around the world, and the way that they have applied to business has been quite remarkable. I love the story of Minute Clinic. Minute Clinic is something that has been running in several states in the United States over the last few years now, and what they noticed was that there was something about going to the doctors that was actually preventing sick people from going to the doctors, and it was the waiting room. I mean, let's think about it. They actually designed the organisation, so the building, the architecture of the institution is designed so that you will wait. So of course they're going to use that room. So there's a pattern when you go to the doctors that you go to the doctors, you check in when you arrive, and the likelihood is that you're going to sit down for a period of any time between perhaps half an hour through to a couple of hours. It's horrible. And people who are genuinely sick, that 2-hour period just sounds like the worst thing they could possibly submit themselves to. So Minute Clinic was begun with the notion that, considering that most people are going to the doctors for items that aren't life and death, so it might be, a sore throat, or a strep throat condition, or it could be an ear infection, or so it could be a cough or a bit of bronchitis. That there are about 10 common items that make up something around 75% of the appointments that a GP will experience in a day. So Minute Clinic began by setting up like a small kiosk. They actually look like a little bolt-on, a tiny little almost photo booth kind of attachment in pharmacies. And there's a nurse-based practitioner in there who has been licensed and endorsed by the state to be able to diagnose only those 10 conditions, only those 10 most common conditions: sore throats, bronchitis, the lot. And they have a tagline, as I had for my opening of my webinar today, a little strap line. And their strap line for Minute Clinic is, "You're sick, we're quick." So if you've got one of those conditions, don't go and wait in a doctor's surgery for 2 hours when you know that all you need is a course of antibiotics and to be sent on your way. Go to Minute Clinic, where they're going to they're going to see you very quickly. If it's something more serious, they won't be able to help you. They'll send you to a doctor's surgery, so don't even think about trying to pull a Swifty there. But if you're sick and you think it's one of these basic things, come and see us, we're quick. And people move on incredibly quickly, which I think is really clever. It's a rejection of the pattern of the way that we have designed doctor surgeries, and also it's a rejection of the function of the way that we use doctor surgeries. I think that's truly creative. I think that's truly disruptively innovative, which is a really fantastic thing to do. I think that another industry that has tackled this with some success has been the shaving industry. Well, part of the shaving industry has done it terribly. Sustaining innovations, the boring type, are the ones where we make everything better. For instance, I don't know about you, but I'm a male who shaves, and I am yet to this day to walk past another male in the street who shaves, look at his face and think, wow, he's got a fantastic shave. I wonder how many blades are on his razor. I'm yet to have it happen. Yet Gillette and Chic and such companies have been spending inordinate amounts of time both developing and marketing the fourth, fifth, sixth razor blade on our shaver heads in the pursuit of convincing us that the shave that we were getting was not good enough. Well, the truth is it was fine. It was fine when we had 2 blades on it. And organisations and businesses such as the Dollar Shave Club have picked up on that. So the Dollar Shave Club is a way you can only order 3 types of shavers when you sign up online to the Dollar Shave Club. You can get a 1 blade, a 2 blade, and a 3 blade. You decide which one you want. It's entirely up to you. Once a month, for about $7 a month, they drop off the shavers in your letterbox. You don't even have to go to the supermarket to get them, which is awesome because I really dislike going to my local supermarket. The car park there has undoubtedly been designed by a drunk 5-year-old, and it shows up in my letterbox. Cheaper, easier, and differently. So rejecting the pattern that in design, that only multiple blades with self-lubricating strips and twisty bally things to match the contours of your face can give you a decent shave. Reject that, and reject the pattern of function, which is that you have to go to the supermarket and get these things at an exorbitant price. No, you don't. No, you don't. We reject that pattern, and we're going to do things differently. Creative people look for opportunities to reject patterns at every possible turn. The next thing I do, and I adore this horrible grainy picture, they repurpose and they purpose combine. So creative people say, you know what, when there's a problem and I haven't got the tool for it, I can still handle it. I can do something different. I don't have to use the tool this way. I can make the tool better. I can use the things that I've got available and I can repurpose them. I can get it to do something different that it wasn't doing before. I can also combine purpose, so I can put things together to get a better outcome. So I can use that old adage about that the sum of its parts isn't as great as the whole. You know, I can say that I can make a great whole by putting the right parts together and getting them to just click, getting them to just clunk together really effectively. And I think these pictures are just a gorgeous example of that very concept, that we've taken 2 things that in isolation are utterly useless and saying, no, I've got a problem here. I want to be able to transport, but the one thing I've got that's transport doesn't work. The other thing I've got that's transport doesn't work. What if I repurpose, or if I purpose combine? What could I actually create that hasn't been seen before, that looks almost quite ridiculous, but works? What could I do to be able to get that done? I think that one of the great examples of that is the mobile phone industry. Obviously, for many, many years, we were creatures who loved our landline. Well, we had a landline. I'm not sure that we loved it. There were when I was a teenager growing up in a household with 3 younger sisters, we had a landline. I didn't love it because when I was 15 years old and I wanted to call somebody at the school who I had a particular crush on, I didn't want my 3 sisters staring at me in the kitchen. And the first repurposing that I saw, or the first purpose combination I saw that I found amazingly valuable around the phone, was not the mobile phone. Something came before it. And it was the day that my father came home with an extension cord for the landline. Now, I had seen the landline before, and I had seen extension cords before, but I had never, ever, ever seen an extension cord for the landline that actually made the plug in the wall long enough such that I could get the phone at least as far as the laundry to stop the 3 smiling faces of my sisters glaring at me while I tried to speak to poor old Lisa on the phone and convince her that I was a half-decent human being. Amazing. Just amazing. And then I think that the extension of things like mobile phones from there was a pretty natural progression once we started to repurpose and purpose combine. Now, I think that these days, I think that the leaders of purpose combination are our restaurants. I think that we know these days that, for instance, you can order online, which is a genuine threat to our food and hospitality industry. We know that you can find out what the menu is at any restaurant just by opening your phone, and a quick Google search or a Yellow Pages search can get you there very quickly to find out what you're going to get while you're there. It's not the availability of that information that drives our decision making or that drives our loyalty to that brand. It's how awesome the combinations are when you get there. 095 is an award-winning restaurant. There's only about 3, it's a chain, but it's a chain of only about 3 links here in Melbourne in Australia. And I am so lucky because 095 has a restaurant just where I live in Dramana on the Mornington Peninsula of Melbourne. And 095 won some international awards, actually won the best pizza in the world award for their margarita pizza at an Italian pizza competition. Quite extraordinary for a little restaurant in Australia to win the best margarita in the world. What makes that margarita awesome? What makes the pizzas down there awesome? It's actually not that they've made them better. I think if you think these days of the pizzas that you order from your mass-produced, you know, your Domino's kind of places, they tend to have so much stuff on them that I'm not even really quite sure what I'm eating anymore. It's piled up. But the pizzas at 095 are an exquisite combination of just the right ingredients, just the right ingredients. I don't eat the margarita when I go there. There's another pizza called the Positano, which just has this gorgeous combination of mozzarella and Parmesan cheese with a gorgeous deli-style hot Hungarian salami, a little bit of olive, and some wonderful green pesto mixed through it. And I just think this is the greatest combination in a pizza I've ever had. I like many other things on a pizza. You can put anchovies on a pizza for me and not offend me. You can put mushrooms on a pizza and not offend me. You can put capsicum, you can put onion, you can put all manner of things. Don't even start me on pineapple, okay? That'll be a separate webinar. You can put all those things on a pizza and not upset me, but I think you'll just make the pizza bigger and ruin the combination. I love those simple combinations. And I think that when we get that right, we demonstrate a cleverness about creativity that's about simplicity and not complexity or complication, which is really worthwhile. That's another thing that creative people do, and providing them opportunity to do so is really important. And I mentioned before, creative people, sometimes they wig us out. And they wig us out because they're so great at creativity and they're so awesome at building and constructing new things that are impressive that we can't access it. We have no idea what you're talking about. And when we're confused or when we don't know what to do, we back out. So all that brilliant creativity was for absolutely nothing. So I'm a firm believer that genuinely creative people do the opposite of that. What they do is they simplify and they engage people who would not otherwise be engaged in big ideas and in invention, in product, in new services. I think the best example of what I can think of about engaging non-consumers is the video gaming industry. And I think that for a while there, and certainly to an extent now still, the video gaming industry knows who its consumers are. They are fast-fingered teenagers. I have a 15-year-old son. He has an Xbox. He loves his Xbox. I ain't playing it with him. And I'm not playing it with him because I'm not a child of 2019. I'm a child of the 80s. And in the 80s, video gaming was a far simpler caper. We had an Atari 2600. And the Atari 2600 had a controller that had 2 components to it. It had a stick and it had a button. And I loved it because I got it. I understood it. It was so simple. It was really cool. But in the quest over those 35 years since I was playing video games regularly, to engage fast-fingered teenagers, they realised that I got old, and as new teenagers came in, the game interface and the play needed to be more complicated, it needed to be more challenging, it needed to be better graphics, better gameplay, better options. And so the controller that my son tries to hand me to play video games with him is the most convoluted, complicated thing that he has ever placed in my hand. There are several buttons on the front. There are things that swivel. There's different coloured buttons. There's different letters on them. There's buttons over this back. There's buttons on the top. I can't stand it, and I'm dead in any game he gives me incredibly quickly. So Nintendo said, wow, do we compete with giants like Xbox in order to try and create something even more complicated, even more fascinating for fast-fingered teenagers? And I thought that'd be really hard. So they said what would be easier might be to say who's not playing video games that should be. And they're the people who aren't teenagers. So they said, what about all the people who are younger, who can't get the movement and their parents won't let them play Call of Duty where you blow holes in people's heads? And what about older people who've given up on video games because they're too complicated? What could we do to get them involved? And they invented something so simple, so intuitive that even old people like me and even my 4-year-old niece can engage with at the same time, and it was the Nintendo Wii. And for a while there, the Nintendo Wii was the most popular video game console on the market, and it wasn't because it was complicated. The characters in there, if you've ever played baseball or gone bowling on a Nintendo Wii, the characters in there don't even have arms. So it's not because of the brilliant graphics, it's because of its simplicity. They made the video gaming experience accessible to me, because me and Brody, my 4-year-old niece, can actually stand there and play the Wii on Christmas Day, and we both know that if you move your arm in one direction, at the right time, there's a reasonable chance that you'll hit the tennis ball or the baseball, and that's pretty good fun. Genuinely creative people don't necessarily make things more complicated, they make things more simple. And as a result, they engage people in their products and services who otherwise would not be engaged. And that's a really important thing. Now, how can you, as a leader, provide an environment where either creative people are created, or where people at the moment who are a little uncreative are given the opportunity to be able to unlock their creative talents? Number one, what you need to do is to provide opportunities to practice. And what I mean by practice is not saying now, standing over them and saying, we've got a problem to solve, now be creative about it. When the stakes are high, in compliance-oriented organisations, people will retreat into compliance. People will retreat to well-worn paths. People will retreat to patterns of behaviour and patterns of problem-solving that have served them well in the past, which is the antithesis of creativity, which is to create something new. So we want to provide non-threatening opportunities. And I think that what we need to do from time to time is to pause in our organisations and to allow people the opportunity to, I myself am a bit of a sporter, and I've often, one of my sports of choice is cricket. So it's not, you don't necessarily get better at cricket all the time by playing cricket, but you go to the nets, you go and practice for a while. There's no threat there. It doesn't matter if you go out. Cricket's a horrible sport because if you're batting, you make one mistake on the first ball you're batting, you're out, and you spend the rest of the day sitting there doing nothing. Awful sport. But if you go to the nets and you go out, you just keep going. You just keep practicing to use the full 20 minutes or so that you've been placed in there to have a bat, and you get your opportunity to practice without threat. Genuine creative-oriented leaders provide those practice opportunities for their people. They stop the work, they accept the temporary halt in productivity, and they say, we're going to practice our creativity. So for instance, I wonder if you can, I've used the desert metaphor today because an activity around that I love to use around survival. So what I do is I put people in the notion of being stranded in the desert. They're trying to survive, okay? And I'm going to give you 14 different items in the desert, and you need to make an argument for what the ranking is of the importance of those items. So I tell them I'm going to give you a loaded pistol, I'm going to give you a book about edible animals of the desert, a bottle of salt tablets, a quarter of water per person, a red and white parachute, a compressed kit with gauze, an air map, a flashlight, a jackknife, a top coat, a raincoat, 2 pairs of sunglasses, a cosmetic mirror, and a magnetic compass. So there's the 14 items you've got, and I need them ranked in order as a team from the most important to the least important, and I'll let them go. Now, of course, there's no specifically right answer. Depending on your viewpoint, you can make a case for any sort of for any of the things that are in there. To be honest, I think there's a little test in here for leaders as well. If they choose the salt tablets, then they've completely lost their minds and you should find new people. But what happens is that they practice higher order thinking. We can ask people to remember something Okay, so for instance, a pattern or a behaviour or a problem-solving strategy that they've used before. But that's lower order thinking. Remembering something isn't an easy thing to do. But ranking, that's what we call higher order thinking. And really clever leaders of great learning and creative people seize those opportunities to provide them with the practice to step into higher order thinking. What that does is it means that we've added to our repertoire of skills that we can go back to. So when the stakes are higher, and a problem comes along that requires us to rank a number of different things that we could do to solve a problem that we have, they retreat back to a new strategy now that they learned when the stakes weren't so high, when the threat wasn't present. They go, well, remember how we first of all eliminated the salt tablets because that was dumb? And the good part about that was that it took us back to only 13 options. So straight away, the whole thing's not as confusing. Let's do that here. Let's first of all the things we could do, let's eliminate the dumb ones. And that's something that most organisations don't do. They continue to rank dumb things against clever things because apparently they all deserve equal weighting, and they don't. Getting rid of the dumb stuff's a really smart thing to do. The next thing they do is they celebrate uniqueness. So what I mean by celebrating uniqueness is they understand that understanding the uniqueness of the people in your organisation is more than just taking a skills audit. Now, skills audits can be really useful. You can find out what skills people have, but what you really only find out is about their strengths. You find out what they're really good at. But sometimes the things that we're good at isn't necessarily what we're after. We're after profile. We're after finding out the individual uniqueness in absolutely everybody that's there. Now, a couple of the activities that you can do, again, sort of low stakes kind of activities that you can do to help people to be able to do that is to put argument opportunities in front of people and see what emerges. And again, the best way is to go low stakes. But what you do is you find out more than what people's strengths are, but you find out who's your weirdo. You find out who values things that are completely inexplicable, or at the time seemingly useless until the opportunity comes along that they become useful. And you find out who sees problems and situations from different angles. Because if we're all looking at a problem from one direction, the likelihood is that there'll be a very narrow scope of solutions that we see. But if we can find out who's capable of seeing an argument, who's capable of seeing a possibility, who's capable of seeing a problem from a different angle, we can defer to that person and say, well, why don't you give us one of those, like we talked about before, those purpose combining opportunities. You can get people to argue, for instance, a really simple one is get them to argue about what's better, dogs or cats. That's a great way of practicing finding out what people value and what's unique about them. Ask people to evaluate what's better, sports cars or luxury cars. And then my favourite one was one day, just as a primer for a staff meeting that we had on a Tuesday, late on a Tuesday, I asked my people, the first thing you're going to do on your table with a group of people is argue what's better, ice cream or cake. And there were some vehement arguments about what you would rather. For instance, if you're at a wedding and there are two dishes, one's ice cream, one's cake, which one do you want to land in front of you and why? Which one's better? The group that I was utterly fascinated to watch was the one that came back to, we're not choosing. We purpose combined and we're going to have ice cream cake. And we're all ridiculously happy. And I thought, that's good. That's, first of all, that's their understanding that challenging pattern. I had only given them two choices, ice cream or cake, and they went, bugger you. We don't like your pattern. We reject it. We reject the notion that it has to be binary, that it has to be one or the other. We're looking for a combo that works. And in this case, this isn't ice cream with tomato sauce where the combination's awful. In this case, the combination's delicious. And I think that it's incredibly important as leaders that we celebrate that uniqueness. So we told everyone that day that the table there, they were just the most creative, amazing table that we'd ever spoke, because they came up with what? Ice cream cake. But it was a wonderful way for us to celebrate pattern rejection, purpose combination, and people who just see the opportunity to tackle the problem that's been put in front of them differently. So that's a really cool thing to be able to do. And one of the things, I guess, also that you can do is even ask people against, you can combine these, so you can find out about people's personal uniqueness, and at the same time do what I did before with the with the stranded in the desert activity, and you could give them, for instance, 10 possible qualities that they could be remembered for when they die, and ask them to rank them, ask them to talk about which one they want to be remembered by. Well, I wonder if you can just put yourself in this position for a moment. If I asked you, what do you want to be known for when you die? Do you want to be honest, known as being honest, loving, smart, adventurous, cooperative, independent, talented, attractive, successful, or creative? What would you choose? And again, there's no right or wrong answer here. But you may find out something about your people that's going to be useful later on when you're either looking to create something new or solve a problem a completely different way. And then why don't I give you one more? This is a really important one and leads into what our next webinar is going to be about as well, and that is the ability to fail spectacularly. So we've all heard it. We've all heard this notion that you're supposed to be able to fail publicly, that great organisations treat fail, and we make naff little acronyms out of fail, like first attempt in learning. And I just, honestly, a little bit of vomit arrives in my mouth whenever I see that up on the wall of an organisation, that fail is first attempt in learning. I think it's okay to learn by getting it right the first time, but I think if you're going to fail, you've got to want to learn from it publicly. You've got to want to learn from it. You got to want to treat that failure lemon like you're squeezing it and you're trying to get every single drop out of it. So as a leader, one of the best things that we can do when fails happen is to declare them publicly, is to get up at the next meeting that you have and say, you know what, before we get started on the agenda today, I just want to share a story with you about something that happened to me this week. And that lets everybody know that there is permission around failure for a purpose. We're letting people know that it's okay to fail, because when you fail, you learn. When you succeed, there's progress. So I don't like first attempt in learning, because it's saying that we're rejecting progress. So I was speaking to a leader recently who said that that's what she's actually put up on the wall of her office. And she goes, in our business, we celebrate fails for their learning and success for its progress. That's it. Look, I think I've been pretty good today. I've gotten through more than 40 minutes without mentioning the most significant event that happened for me in the last few weeks, and that is that I'm an AFL supporter and I'm a Richmond supporter, and I was at the AFL Grand Final when my mighty Tigers defeated the GWS Giants by 89 points and claimed the 2019 premiership. And it reminded me, as my Richmond brain and my Real Learners brain combined for the design of this webinar today, it reminded me of a book that I read when Richmond won their last premiership, which was in 2017, by a fellow called Conrad Marshall, and the book was called Yellow and Black. And the thing that Hardwick, the coach of Richmond, Damien Hardwick, said regularly to his team is, he said, there's only two things happening every time we play. We're either losing or we're learning. And so that meant that he actually wasn't upset with outcome. If he lost, then there was great, because the good part is we learn more from our losses than we do from our wins. And if we're winning, then that's great, because we're making progress towards our end goal. So it's all great. It's all fantastic and allows you to have a beautiful Pollyanna level of optimism about it. But what Hardwick pointed out was that in 2017, when Richmond won the premiership, that philosophy actually wasn't just convenient or nice, but it was true. So it was a belief that through evidence was born to be true. Richmond, when they won the premiership in 2017, didn't win every game. They weren't dominant. But every time they lost a game during 2017, the very next time that they played against that team, they won. So the notion that failure genuinely does spur a higher level of learning that translates into a next level of performance stood the test of stood the hypothesis. The hypothesis was able to be proven wholeheartedly as that season unfolded. So I think that it's more than just saying it's okay to fail. It's being okay with the outcome of failing. It's being okay with the emotion of failing. It's an interrogation of that failure, not so that we can find blame, but so we can find the kernel of learning in there that absolutely everybody in our organisation, including but not at the detriment of the person who did the failing, including all the people who didn't fail and the people who did fail, can learn from it so that the next time they have a go at the same task, they're better equipped. So I think that it's not just about being okay with failing. I think that it's about failing, as well, I put the heading here, about failing spectacularly. And I think that when you do fail spectacularly, you allow other people to share in the great learning of that failure. All right, I think that'll do me for today. Hey, oh boy, normally just looking here, I've got the handouts as a 0, but so I think that my attempt to upload the handout today hasn't worked. Let me just. Oh, no, it's not going to work if I try and do it on the run. So I'll tell you what, I'm going to give you an email address in just a minute, and if you would like the slide deck from today, all you have to do is to drop us a line, and we will make sure that that happens for you. So please drop us a line to the email addresses that you see in just a moment. Hey, before you go though, I mentioned that thing about failing and how it's going to catapult us into our next webinar for the year. It's our final webinar, and you'll notice that I've used a similar but not same picture to create the banner for this next webinar coming up. I used the light bulbs around being creative, and then I said, well, what you need to do to be creative is to fail. You need to smash some light bulbs. And what I would like to do in the next webinar is unpack for you how you can be Damien Hardwick, how you can genuinely embrace failure, you can see it as learning, and how you can, I guess, embrace that inherent value in learning by trial and error. I would contend to you that we have become really poor in our society at being able to learn by trial and error. We avoid the error way too much. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't know how many times you learned not to touch the stove, how many times you were told not to touch the stove when you were a kid. But if you were like me, there was one way that you did learn, and that was to touch the stove. It was to make an error. When we eliminate truly valuable ways to learn, such as by trial and error, we do a horrible disservice for our people. So I'm going to talk to you about how you can bring that in without breaking too many light bulbs. And if you do break them, how you can be okay with that. So I really hope that's a webinar opportunity that you jump in on and make the most of in November. Hey, I mentioned before that I'm happy to send you that handout. I'm just checking if I have any other questions today. We've had a bit of a passive audience today. But if you have any, if you do have any questions, make sure that you can drop me a line personally at adam@adamvoigt.com.au. And if you would like the slide deck from today, I reckon the best way to get it nice and quickly would be to send an email to info@reallearners.com.au. If there's anything else we can do to help you with your incredibly important work, then we're here for you. All right, thanks so much for coming along, everyone. Have a wonderful month, and I'm going to see you all in November. We'll do some trial and error. Okay, bye for now.